Okay, I think we're live. Good morning, everyone, both to everyone on the screen and anyone who's joining by watching online. It is the May 20th, 2023 edition of the Saturday Free School for Philosophy and Black Liberation. And as always, it's so good to see everyone. Today, we're going to first have a brief discussion about the Philadelphia primary election, which just occurred this past Tuesday on the 16th. And for Philadelphia, the biggest race for the primary election was the mayoral race. So we're going to have a brief discussion about what the election results really say, not necessarily about the candidates themselves. Well, we will talk about the candidates, but in particular about what it says about the state of the people of Philadelphia. And not just necessarily the votes that were counted, but what the non-votes really mean. And then we will go we'll spend most of our session of Free School today going back to Hegel's Science of Logic, which we've been deeply reading over these past weeks, especially as we as Free School focus a lot on philosophy and the philosophic assumptions of today. But to begin with our discussion of the primary election, as people know, there were a lot of different candidates running for the mayor office. And at the end, Sherelle Parker, who was the candidate endorsed by the Democratic machine, she won. And there's a lot of different narratives coming out about why she won. Is it because she got the Black vote? That people saying that the election was along lines of race. But we wanted to focus specifically on data around turnout, for example. Just to give a picture, and then we can go into a discussion of what the data means, or what the data is even missing, is that different newspapers and sources have said that turnout in the mayoral election, well, I guess actually the primary election as a whole, is somewhere close to 33%, 30%. But if you go to the actual official city commissioner's website about votes counted, they say that the turnout was 27%, which means 27% of registered voters. So this is not even the Philadelphia population, but 27% of the registered voters actually turned out to vote in this primary election. And when Doc and I were talking earlier, we think it's closer. That's an overestimation of turnout. And it's somewhere closer to 20%, 23%. And that means that 75%, if not more, of Philadelphia, like registered voters, right? But let's just talk about Philadelphians as a whole who can vote. It may not be registered. That's somewhere between over 75%, probably close to 80% of Philadelphians who are eligible to vote did not go to the polls and vote. And I think that's a huge number to focus on, especially what it says about people's belief of, does it matter? To me, I feel like it says something about people's vote of no confidence in the city's institutions, especially the governance system. And I wanted to focus specifically on Philadelphia. If you look at it as a whole, if you go to the official Philadelphia City Commissioner's website on turnout, you can actually look at the different parts of Philadelphia. You can look at it by ward, but also look at it by division and break down even further of what turnout looks like across the city. And so in places in Philadelphia where a lot of the managerial class, higher income voters, where they live, the turnout can be anywhere between 25% and 40%, closer to 40, 45%. For example, near University of Pennsylvania's campus, where a lot of the managerial class lives, a lot of liberals, solid Democratic voters who have higher income. I think in some divisions, it's as high as 50%, 55% voted and turned out. But when you look at far West Philly, but especially looking at North Philly, the turnout, like let's just focus on North Philly, the turnout in some divisions is anywhere between 5%, 6%, 8%, 9%, 12%. And then the more generous turnout divisions are like 19%, which means over 80% of the people, the working poor who live in those divisions, are not voting at all. And when you actually look at the map, it's pretty astounding because there are parts of North, like the center of North Philly, for example, it's not just one division or two divisions, but it's a whole cluster of divisions that all have turnout around 6%, for example, which means over 90% of people are not voting. They're not turning out. It's almost as if it's like it's just another day for them. They don't feel like they not just that you can interpret it as not just people feeling like it doesn't matter, but it's people saying like, I'm purposely not going to vote for anyone. In a field where you have 12 candidates running, I'm not going to vote for anyone. That says a lot. But I just wanted to paint a picture of turnout because I think nowadays it doesn't, like, I work for unions, for example, all nonprofits and groups like labor unions, people are focusing on get out the vote. And it shows it doesn't matter how much money or manpower you're spending on getting out the vote. People are purposely not voting for a reason. It is a deliberate choice people are making. The last thing I just wanted to say before we can have a discussion and go deeper into the data if people want. But the other thing is that a lot of unions endorsed, a lot of the large unions, of course, endorsed different candidates. But it also says something about working people, the working poor's belief or non-belief in the leadership of these unions. That here you have union leadership endorsing certain candidates in a really contentious race. But now you see that some places, 90%, 80% of people on the block are not going out to vote. What does that also say about their vote of no confidence in their own union leadership? And so if you look at the point I kind of wanted to make was just that, to me, the Philadelphia primary election showed that people more and more, they're not going out to vote. And it's a clear example of the crisis of legitimacy, not just in city government, but also even in institutions that are supposed to represent the working class. But increasingly, the people are not. It's a question, puts into question the leadership of institutions like labor unions, who publicly are endorsing certain candidates, but it says nothing about if your membership is actually going to vote for those candidates. But that was an overview of the data. I don't know if you want to say anything as well, Doc, or anyone else who's been looking at the aftermath of the election.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Emily, for your doing the research on the data. And we're talking about the Democratic Party primary, which pretty much decides who will be the mayor, because the Republican Party, in many respects, is a non-entity in terms of voter, people who are voters and registered as Republicans. So we're talking about, I think it's estimated between 775 and 778,000 registered Democrats in the city of Philadelphia. A huge number. Almost everybody that is registered to vote in Philadelphia, or put it this way, the majority who are registered to vote in Philadelphia are Democrats, okay? Now, of that 775 to 778,000 Democrats, about 2/3 to 70% are African Americans. If you add Latino or Spanish speaking and Asians, it takes you up to about, I guess, 73%. However, as the city gentrifies, a growing number of educated, what we call the managerial technocratic elite are moving to Philadelphia and are registered as Democrats for obvious reasons. They want to have a political impact. These are primarily white voters. They live in certain neighborhoods, as Emily mentioned, for example, around the University of Pennsylvania, perhaps in Northern Liberties and Old City, in these neighborhoods, parts of Chestnut Hill that we associate with the professional managerial class, the highly educated. They make up anywhere from, let us say, 25% to 1/3 of the registered Democrats, and they're growing. They are concentrated again in certain divisions and in certain wards. My neighborhood, which you would never see white people manning the polls, now that's all who man the polls down here. They control the Democratic Party apparatus, and they get out the vote. So they vote in high numbers, very high numbers. They would have a propensity to vote for Helen Ginn, to have been influenced by the rally that Bernie Sanders and AOC held here in Philadelphia. It didn't even warrant a notice by most Black voters. I mean, I doubt that many even know who AOC is. Maybe they know Bernie Sanders, but that rally, which was in this neighborhood, by the way, was designed to mobilize the very group of white, technocratic, highly educated people. But the real story, as Emily points out, is the people who voted by not voting. And when you look at divisions, that is the voting, the place where people go to vote. For example, where you vote is the division within a larger ward. And those divisions are defined by income, home ownership or non-home ownership, education, and so on. So it's kind of a mirror of the grassroots. And when you look at those divisions, which not only in this election, but in the last election, and the election before that, and the election before that, divisions which have 2% turnout, 5% turnout, you're talking about 95 to 98% of the people not voting. And then when you go to more what we call the stable Black working class, the lower middle class, people who are professionals, but in the lower rung of that, for example, in Cobb's Creek, maybe in certain parts of Westmount Erie, and so on, when you look at their voter turnout, and it too, not at that very low level that you find among the poor working class and all of that, but their voter turnout is below 25%. These are people who you would normally associate with an interest in, a motivation to vote, and they normally did. And if you go back to Philadelphia's election, they constituted not only the activists to elect the first Black mayor, the second Black mayor, the third Black mayor, to the point where they just got tired of electing Black mayors that did nothing for the most part, except raise their taxes. So they have substantially withdrawn. And if you, in certain divisions, in certain wards, that like Cobb's Creek or West Oak Lane or parts of West Mount Erie, which again, the stable working class home ownership is high, especially you go to West Mount Erie, beautiful blocks, people care about their homes and so on. A low voter turnout in an election which the media and political commentators have said is a consequential election of a city in crisis. So here's my point. First of all, if you look at certain things in the Philadelphia Inquirer, they say, well, we're estimating between 25 and 30% turnout. I question your estimate. One of the things is they're overestimating the votes, the mail-in ballots that have not yet been counted. The other thing is that Sherelle Parker, congratulations to her. She graduated from the place that I went to college, whatever that means. She got under 100,000 votes, which is a kind of way of saying that the winner won with less than 12% of the vote. I think my math is right. Less than 12% of the registered voters. Now, why do we say it was an insider-outsider race? First of all, and this crystallized in the last month of the election, it was unclear how this would play out. Bob Brady, who was a longtime political political player, he's the chairman of the City Democratic Committee, which means the machine. The machine controls, in Philadelphia, there are 67 voting wards, over 1,700 voting divisions, okay? The City Democratic Committee controls the apparatus of voting as well as getting people to the polls, okay? Maybe it's a conflict of interest, you might say. They control both the voting apparatus and mobilizing people to get to the polls. That's a lot of power, okay? So the City Democratic Committee, more or less in the last week, endorsed Sherelle Parker, which meant that the entire apparatus, for the most part, of 67 wards, 48 of them got letters from Bob Brady and did endorse Sherelle Parker. Huge advantage, insider advantage. Then, early on, she was endorsed by the Building Trades Council. That is the council that represents the building trades, the most conservative, most white, and in history, the most racist of the union movement. Okay? But then she got the endorsement of two of the largest parts of the building trades and politically most influential, the Electricians Union, and all you have to do is drive down Spring Garden Street and see its headquarters to get a sense of how rich and powerful they are. The Electricians Union and the Carpenters Union, also a very big, magnificent union headquarters on Spring Garden Street. But these two, which would normally not endorse a Black candidate, the building trades were known for endorsing Frank Rizzo, for example, when he was a Democrat and when he was a Republican. Okay. However, the building trades are now aligned with a remade Democratic Party nationally and locally and statewide. It's a really interesting dance to look at, how they moved from an all-white union organization to now endorsing Black candidates and a Black mayoral candidate, and even having as the head of the Building Trades Council a Black man, at least the titular head, the symbolic head. So now you get the City Democratic Committee, the most powerful, at least financially, in a lot of ways, electorally, parts of the union movement, the building trades, okay, where service industry unions are in decline in membership, the building trades are always working because of all of this building that goes on in Center City, okay? By the way, a good part of their membership don't even live in the city and don't even vote upon who the union leadership is going to endorse. But the other side of this was District Council 33, which is the largest group of unions, city workers, mainly non-professional city workers. It's the largest group of workers in the city at this time. They came out, the council came out and endorsed Jeff Brown. However, the largest union within the council, the sanitation workers, from which most of the leaders of the overall district council have come from, the most organized, the most politically aware group, that part endorsed Sherelle Parker, went against the council and endorsed Sherelle Parker. So now you get the largest part of the city workers, the largest union of city workers, the district council of building trades, plus the City Democratic Committee. This is an insider operation now. Then you add to it all of the mayoral the formerly mayoral candidates, I think 2 or 3 Black mayoral candidates who dropped out and then endorsed Sherelle Parker. The president of City Council, Darrell Clark, endorses Sherelle Parker, although there were 2 other former City Council people running for mayor. Then you get probably the most highly organized political machine among Black people, and that is in the Northwest. That is West Mount Airy, West Oak Lane, parts of Germantown, from which Sherelle Parker came in her political evolution, but is controlled by Congressman Dwight Evans. You put all of this together, it is almost insurmountable in a low turnout election, okay? Then you add to it the negative ads that were run against the 3 alternative candidates to Sherelle Parker. They started with Jeff Brown when it looked like he was the leading candidate. Okay, they start with Jeff Brown, bunch of negative ads. He's not what you think he is. He is not giving jobs that you think he's, all of that. Then they went to Dom, Alan Dom, again, a former city councilman, negative ads. But the most negative, and each of these people were either at one time in the lead or potentially leading in the polls. Then the last one, they went after Helen Ginn. And this was a smear campaign, the likes of which I don't know we've ever seen in Philadelphia politics. Never. I mean, it's just and of course with negative ads, she didn't have a chance to respond to all of them. And it was to take her down, and they did. They succeeded in that. Now, what you have to know is that this was it was the most expensive mayoral campaign in the history of the city. And when you say expensive, that means ad campaigns. Sherelle Parker was the only candidate that was not targeted by negative campaign ads, which suggests that the negative campaign ads were coming from people associated with Sherelle Parker. Okay. What I'm saying is, in an election like this, it was almost a foregone conclusion that Sherelle Parker would win. All of the advantages were on her side, probably including money. I'm not quite certain about that. There were many PACs around her. And if you look at her campaign staff, and I'm not just talking about the get out the vote staff, I'm talking about the strategists, the pollsters, and so on. These were people from the Biden campaigns, from any number of mainstream, mainly white campaigns. Okay? Blackface, white strategists. We know what that suggests. But with all of that, and targeting the black vote, because this is what her campaign was designed to block Helen or Jeff Brown, for the most part, from getting any black votes. Okay? Even though people like Michael Cord and Uncle Bobby's and Mark Lamont Hill and them endorsed Helen Ginn. Helen Ginn was cut off purposely from the black vote. And this started early on. I heard it early on that, well, she's not what you think she is. She has hidden, and frankly, none of this I knew about. I mean, I said to the people here a lot of times, I never found her to be that person that they were talking about. I know Bobby Zankel said to me, we talked on the phone after the election, he said, yeah, there were people who said that she wasn't this, she was. I said, I don't know that person, and it's easy to smear someone who people don't know. Oh, you think you knew her. Oh, you didn't really know, blase, blase. But they cut her off from the black vote. Bernie Sanders and AOC didn't help the matter at all, which says something, because I want to go forward to 2024. But what the data shows, and this is the story, the political system and the government of the city is illegitimate to the majority of people. It is a crisis of legitimacy. The Philadelphia Inquirer and the mainstream news outlets and so on are going to say one thing: because they represent the establishment and they wish to establish the legitimacy of this election. This election shows the illegitimacy of the ruling elite and the political class, black, white, or otherwise, in this city. That is what the story is. And Emily is absolutely right. There were no, as I know, town hall meetings among union members to take a straw poll. Who should we endorse? This didn't happen in the electricians, or never does, union. In the carpenters in District Council 33, or in the sanitation division of District Council 33. It didn't happen in any union and never does. So these unions politically operate undemocratically. And their members know it. And that's why the membership votes many times, or most times increasingly, the opposite of what the union leadership says they should do. Of course, now going forward to 2024, in Philadelphia, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has a real potential base of voter support coming up to a Democratic primary for president. The no turnout was not just against the city Democratic Committee, but all of their connections, including to Joe Biden and to Featherman and to Shapiro and others. In other words, anybody that still thinks this is the game in town, they're going to be deeply disappointed. These insiders are going to be left out in the cold, as they say. And I just to say, this is the opposite of the 1983 election in Chicago, where Hal Washington demolished the Chicago political machine, probably the strongest political machine in the country. He demolished it from the grassroots. This was not a grassroots election, and it reinstalled the machine rather than the people. The other thing is, people are looking for outsiders. That's why Jeff Brown had such resonance in the beginning. He just couldn't put together a ground team. He was politically inexperienced, but he had the goodwill of many Black people because of hiring people out of jail. People like Pastor Keith supported him. And I'm certain, and in my own neighborhood, I saw signs for him among people who don't put signs in their windows. I know this because I know these people. So there was a certain outsider appeal of Jeff Brown. Okay. Now, Robert Kennedy, outsider with a name that resonates with a lot of Black folk, the Kennedy name. Okay. The other thing is the outsider appeal of Donald Trump to Black folk. And there's some polls that show that he is favorably looked at by 30% of Black voters. No small thing. You have to understand the historical attachment of Black people to the Democratic Party. And this means Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal, John F. Kennedy, this bright young man who called Martin Luther King, who was in jail when John F. Kennedy was coming up to the general election of 1960, Lyndon Johnson and the signing of the civil rights bills, Robert F. Kennedy, tragically assassinated at a time where he was talking about taking up the mandate of Martin Luther King and the war on poverty and opposing war at the very moment that he's about to be the nominee. He just won the California primary, and that night they assassinate him. And then, of course, Barack Obama. There is a lot of emotional and actual connection to the Democratic Party. And then the Republican Party, having lost Black support, because at least at one time, at least 40%, maybe 50% or more of Black voters were Republicans because of Abraham Lincoln. You see what I'm saying? But now, as we saw from this election, most Black voters in Philadelphia, probably 80% of Black voters, are saying we do not have a political party. And the past is in the past. And what is today, neither party, neither group of insiders are addressing. This makes 2024 an even more dynamic and explosive political moment than any election, perhaps since the election of 1860. And the fight in these big cities for the Black vote is going to be the great struggle, the great ideological struggle. And all of the issues of war and peace, of poverty, of the working class are on the table. This is probably one of the great ideological moments in the history of this country. I mean, so we have to, I think in the free school, we're kind of prepared for it. We're not surprised by any of that, of this. So that's all I would say about that. Emily, forgive me if I went on too long. I really apologize.
No, because I think this election is not because the way I also saw it was people want to make the Philly election, the primary election, the Democratic race and Sherelle Parker's victory, just something in of itself, but it's not. And it's really important and valuable what you just said, to like that last point is to connect it to what it will mean for the upcoming 2024 election, which is not simply just a political election, but instead it is both an ideological snapshot of America and the future, but also it is an ideological struggle. And I wanted to underline what you said, where you like these 80% of Black voters in Philly who did not vote. What they're saying is that we don't have a political party. And this is coming out of a historical trajectory where Black voters, like you said, have had an emotional, an actual connection to the Democratic Party for a reason. We are part of the Democratic Party for very specific reasons. JFK, FDR, and the New Deal. And here you have a moment where the center does not hold. And I think, and also going back to what I started with earlier of what you said, that the fight leading up to 2024, which is next year, the presidential election, it's not, like I said, it's not just a political election. What it is, it's the fight in all these American cities for the Black vote is not just an electoral fight, it's an ideological struggle. It's an ideological moment that has ramifications for America's future. And I think it's important also to underline what this says about the ideological struggle, that it is an ideological struggle, is also because it is a moment that will change the American people and also the fabric and almost identity building of this nation forever. Like that's the moment we're in. And I just wanted to share that I was at my union staff meeting yesterday, and like we're having a conversation by region, like the different regions of the state, because our staff are all across Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania is an interesting state in that the different regions are very reflective of different parts of America. But when people were talking about the issues that we face the most, what I found most interesting, for example, is that in Philly, the primary issue people talk about is gun violence, but also its connection to the crisis of youth and children. And what was interesting is that the staff who were speaking from the Northeast Pennsylvania, which is more rural, deindustrial, like very white, they said the same things. They're like, actually, what's funny is that the number one issue we think about is gun violence. And the people who are the gun violence in that area, it's not Black people, it's white people. Mental health issues, drug epidemic, like deindustrialization, unemployment, gun violence, crisis of youth and children. Like people don't want to live in these areas anymore. Communities are broken. There's not even informal community structures to help alleviate like all these issues. And this is also part of this context where in America it's a moment where the American people as a whole, but especially like you said, like in these cities, the fight for the Black vote, for like basically for it's the fight for the Black vote, what it says about the Black proletariat as well. This is like the center does not hold, and it's a moment where and not only anything can happen, but the people are looking for the outside. They're looking for there's a reconstitution happening. So I just wanted to add that, and which is also me to say, like, you didn't talk for too long, Doc. And I think this is really important because this is not the end of this conversation. This is the continuous conversation we'll be having until the election in 2024.
I just wanted to add, that was a really helpful introduction as well, because I think as the election was going on, despite how much money was spent, like whether it was on like YouTube through ads or the number of like paper, like I forget, collateral that was mailed.
Yeah.
Like we received so much collateral. I think this was even more than what I got from the governor and Senate elections. Well, actually, I don't know.
Midterms.
And despite that, I feel like there was so little clarity actually around the election. And I think that's why this conversation has been really helpful, and it also has helped to contextualize, like you and Emily were saying, Doc, you and Emily were saying, in terms of the broader ideological struggle. Because one, the fact that people didn't turn out, I think also reflects the fact that despite a crisis that's happening in places such as Philadelphia, people don't believe that there was a candidate amongst who they were able to elect from that was actually going to be able to substantially change the city or change what is going on in the city and actually represent what the people are trying to, or the crises that people are perceiving. And then the other piece is that in spite of such a sharp moment, conversation has been stifled, I think, if anything, like actual genuine conversation, because like you guys were saying, in terms of leading up to election, how many town halls were there? How many votes were there, like actually amongst people to discuss these candidates with each other? And I think that's also reflective of what's going to happen in the presidential elections too, where, you know, we've talked about RFK Jr. and, you know, in interviews where you actually get his perspective, much of it has been clipped and cut, if he's even shown at all. And I know, like, recently there's conversation around how the Democratic National Convention is not going to hold debates for him to even have a platform to engage with the other candidates and like have a voice to reach the public. And And that's significant at a time when actually, if anything, more conversation and more clarity around what is this ideal, like what is this moment and what is the path that we need to take to get out of it.
Yeah, I'll just say one quick thing, which I just want to echo everything that we've been saying. More so just the feeling I had during the mayoral election with so many candidates. It wasn't just the candidacy question. It was like, it almost felt like we were wading through this fog of ideological confusion, but also sort of like the fog of war and everything. We only at this point could we have like, okay, the pieces have fallen more into place. But I almost think it's because it was so deliberate that this atmosphere of ideological confusion was created so that people were not able, or just as much as they could, the ruling class just wanted to suppress the sense that the people could make their own choice, see their own way out of it. And so I feel like that's more like this notion that so many people voted by not voting is just so clarifying. And my hope, but also I suppose that's the reason why we're going into the 2024 election with this experience in mind, knowing that it'll be a huge battleground and there'll be a lot of ideological manipulation and confusion and sort of like shrouding of facts and clarity, and even the chance for a conversation and the truth. That'll really be the task for, and even beyond, I mean, leading up to, but obviously just this moment. That was just one thing I wanted to say.
Yeah, just to add to what others are saying, I think Doc's introduction and also the data that we're talking about with the turnout stuff is really, really important and really helpful for me, because I think when anytime you discuss like any kind of election in this country, you have to be clear about where you're starting from and what you're actually assessing. Because I think because of how we've been, I think, conditioned in some ways, like, I feel like for me, the first thing I want to know is like, oh, why did this person win? When really that's not the central question. And actually the real question is what does the overall election, who voted, who didn't vote, the mechanisms behind certain people getting votes, what does all of that tell us about where the political system is, its legitimacy, where the people are in relation to that? And I think, yeah, something that I've been, because I feel like when we were first seeing the results with Sherelle Parker winning, with like a pretty clear margin of victory, but still, I don't know. I feel like my initial instinct was to be like, oh, like, I guess the Black vote did carry Sherelle. And I feel like to some extent you can say that, but, and also like to be like, oh, like, I wonder for the portion of the Black people in Philadelphia who did vote, like, because I feel like on the one hand you have to assess like the institutional aspect of it, which you laid out, but then also I've been curious about how much did just like issues, in the more stereotypical sense, how much did issues play a role in getting Sherelle to vote, especially in terms of basically gun violence. And I think that in that sense, Sherelle Parker was positioned more as like the candidate who would be the most firm against gun violence and crime. And it was kind of funny because after the election, some of my like white coworkers were very confused because they're like, why would Black people vote for the pro-police candidate? Like, that whole thing. And I think it's also the other so I guess like my main takeaway or what I'm processing is that, yeah, like with any like the kind of discussion that we're having today in Free School about the Philly election, and especially looking forward to 2024, is one, yeah, like what is this place that you're starting from in even discussing any kind of election in this country? And also, like, it's almost like a multivariable kind of analysis. Like there's so many different ways to cut it, but you have to look at it in the totality. But I think the other thing that is very distinct about this particular Philly election is, I think it shows the fact that there were also so many candidates and that no people didn't really drop out and that there's so many people who like actually did have a shot. I think it shows the breaking down of the Democratic coalition too. And I think the fact that, Helen Gim representing what you could call like the national progressive machine, right? But then that's not exactly the same as the establishment Democratic machine. But I feel like, I don't know, just the fact that basically you had all these contending forces within the Democratic Party, I think is very interesting because it shows that actually everything is almost up for grabs, and it could really go any one way or another. But yeah, I don't know. It's just interesting because I feel like there was this whole narrative. There was a narrative, I think, boosting Helen Gim, which was kind of like coming off the Chicago mayoral election of like the progressive candidate, and like, oh, like, will this be a progressive wave that sweeps across all of these cities? But it's like, yeah, you have these grand narratives that are pushed by the media and everything, but actually, like, it has nothing really to do with like the actual substance of what's going on in that particular city. Also, what are the forces involved? And yeah, I feel like that's what I'm really getting out of this conversation and what Doc was talking about. Like all of the context, like all of these different institutional forces. But also I think one of the questions that I also have is I feel like what we call the democratic machine, like the establishment democratic machine in Philadelphia, and how it has become very, in some ways, like interwoven with what we think of as like the black vote. I think on the one hand, you could look at like the black vote as something in an almost sociological sense of like the fact that black people are pretty organized. And I think that that is a positive thing. And it feels like something that is um, kind of a legacy of the civil rights era in which the vote was very important, and basically black people became the most like organized political constituency, and not just for elections but also in general in American society. Black people are the most just like organized group. But at the same time, legacy how does that actually interact with, yeah, like the overall crisis of legitimacy of like American society, but also of like black voters, of black America? And yeah, I don't know, like I don't know if I really have answers for it, but I'm really interested to see how these dynamics continue to unfold, especially leading up to the 2024 election. And the last thing I wanted to add is something that we talked about in one of our reading groups recently was, we've had this thesis in the free school for a while that whether Trump knows it or not, that the Trump election and the Trump movement, the MAGA movement, was actually something that was only possible because of the civil rights movement and because of Martin Luther King, whether or not Trump acknowledges it. And the fascinating thing about this new development with RFK Jr. is that if you look at it one way, the emergence of RFK Jr. is something that was made possible also by Trump, right? Trump, in some ways, shocked the political system to a certain degree and represented a shock to the political system, which also allows for like figures like RFK Jr. to arise. But the other interesting thing is that RFK Jr. represents in a more crystallized and very clear form someone who is directly himself says, I am a product of the legacy not only of the Kennedy brothers, but specifically of the civil rights movement and that era, and of King. He will reference Martin Luther King, maybe not as much as like obviously his father and his uncle, but almost as much. And I think that in a lot of ways, it confirms what our earlier thesis had been, which is that Trump, even though he, perhaps a more murky way, represented things that were made possible in American politics by the gains and the achievements of the civil rights movement. And that because you can look at RFK Jr. in the context of the Trump moment of American politics that we're still living in, that's almost a further confirmation that Trump himself too is someone who is made possible by the civil rights movement, because RFK Jr. represented so much more clearly. But yeah, I don't know. That was just something that I was thinking about leading up to the 2024 election.
Yeah, I also thought this election was really interesting. Like, because there is such a wide field of candidates, I feel like on the one hand, it represents
like new possibilities for ideological struggle, because I feel like the reasons that some of us in the free school like Helen Gim, for instance, is because like we actually know her or have met her, and there was more like there was actually the feeling of like, oh, like maybe there's a possibility for like real politics to happen. But then there definitely were like pretty ugly campaigns against her, like framing her as like, oh, like she's basically the next AOC, like she's so woke, she's so out of touch, stuff like that. And I feel like it's interesting that on the one hand there's so much possibility, like so much actual possibility with the number of candidates, but then the way that it gets distorted, I guess, is to basically like try to distract or to try to obscure and make the ideological struggle, I think, more confusing. And I think one other thing is that the Inquirer polls and like the Emerson College poll that came out, I think Monday or Friday, like just before the election, it had like all 4 candidates, like except for Jeff Brown, at about 20% with like a 4% margin either way. And so they were really like the way that the polls were going was saying that, oh, actually any candidate could take this. And in fact, Helen Gim is like slightly in the lead, although anybody could take it. And I think it's interesting that Sherelle Parker did like sort of decisively win, but that was not evident at all in the polls. And I think that that's really fascinating because it was something like that's characteristic of in some ways like Trump voters, which is that you don't trust the poller, like you can't trust the polling data. Like these people are not going to tell you to your face what they're thinking. Instead, they're going to decide and then they're going to move. And yeah, I just think that that's a really interesting phenomena that has not been, I feel like, emphasized as much, where yeah, like people were really highly confident going into things. Because I also canvassed a little bit, like partially for Helen Gim, and it was really interesting talking to people. Because actually, I talked to this woman who she was like a lifelong Democrat, but she was like, I'm done with the Democratic Party. Like this is the last election that I'm voting Democrat. Like, and it was interesting because she was like, but where am I going to go? Like being an independent, you have no say in the city. Being a Republican, like she was skeptical because she feels like basically the Republican Party is racist. But at the same time, like I feel like people are pretty fed up. And so actually what I see with this Sherelle Parker winning is that this is like the last chance. Like I think once she enters office, I think people are going to really see. Because yeah, I think the crime and police, and when I was talking to people, I feel like people are most concerned about like what's happening to the youth, like the lack of discipline, and people are really concerned. And that same woman said like, oh, like I am voting for Sherelle Parker because I believe that as a Black mother, like she just understands something more than Helen Gim. And she was like, I don't trust Helen Gim because I've had like bad experiences with Asian people in my neighborhood. She was like, I have no reason to trust this woman, like just good faith. Like there's no reason for me to just put my faith in her. And so I think it's really interesting because I kind of feel like the Black proletariat's still sort of waiting for things, like it's the waiting period of trying to assess like where, like what to do. But in terms of 2024, I feel like there's actually quite a lot of time. And I also don't think that people voted for Sherelle Parker with like complete faith or confidence. It was more like, yeah, because of the smears against the others. And also I think like the progressive Democratic vote seemed like split between Reinhardt and Helen Gim.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think people saw that like with Jeff Brown, like he didn't really seem to have as much of a winning chance. So I feel like people piled more onto Sherelle Parker. But I feel like it's also interesting, I guess, how much people try to project national politics onto Philadelphia,
Mm-hmm.
like it happened in Pennsylvania, like it happened with the Fetterman Shapiro stuff. And I feel like with this too, people are trying to say like, oh, this says something really big about like the American people. And I feel like maybe it does say something about where the American people are at, but I don't think you can flatten it into like, oh, a progressive victory or like, oh, a conservative swing.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's much deeper and much more subtle than that. Yeah. And yeah, I also think like while canvassing, I feel like you do get a sense of like the new American people more. Because I don't know, like people were like sitting out on their stoop and stuff, and like multiple like men in their 50s would just like say like I wouldn't be saying anything, and they'd just be like, you know, like you and me, we're the same. Like if we bleed, like we bleed exactly the same. If we get hurt, it's exactly the same. And it was really like interesting that all of them are like, yeah, like Americans are less racist. Like this street is more integrated now than it used to be. Like, how can you say that things are worse? And even though like they're concerned about like their children, they're concerned about like the city, I feel like things are not, they don't see things in terms of like hopelessness exactly. It's more like waiting, watching, hoping. Yeah. And yeah.
Yeah, Nuri, something I noticed while canvassing was in Philadelphia, at least, was it's very interesting because people are not simple binary voters. They have nuances as to why they want to go a certain direction, and people are also very kind. Um, except in my experience in Mount Airy and the Northeast and parts of South Philly. I never want to go there again. People are so rude, especially Mount Erie. There's such uptight liberals who talk about, you know, if you ever want to see a real what a liberal is really like, go to Mount Erie and start knocking on the door and talking about community. You'll never get a door slammed in your face harder, and those are the good liberals. So it's really surprising to me that the turnout was really low. I forgot what really wanted to say. I really just wanted to make fun of Mount Airy in the Northeast, and the one of the nicest places I canvassed, or in terms of people being kind, was Nicetown, which is Nicetown, Tioga, and this one woman laughed at me. She said, "You better get out of here by the time the sun sets." And I said, "I can't. I have to stay till 9." And I was canvassing in the 2016 election for the AFL-CIO. I got paid $15 an hour. It was a good time.
Something that Emily mentioned about community and its importance in developing the youth and the people, especially like she was mentioning in the northeast parts of Philadelphia, made me immediately think of its connection to deindustrialization. It made me think about that little trip that Doc Shomborto Purba and I took to the shipyards. And if you look at those places, if you look at the abandoned, about the tens of abandoned buildings around those areas, all built to provide this sense of community that is lacking in today's Philadelphia, you can really see the psychological effects that might have on the people and the youth when you don't have um, this community for support, when you don't have this community to just help you when you're having mental issues, it can lead you to have the sense of, I am not going to vote. And as you said, Doc, voting by not voting, that's I almost see this as a vote of no confidence, and it made me really really appreciate like the America that was building its industrial bases, like giving jobs to these communities, making sure that they were at some point really connected to each other. And now you have identity politics and this advent of individualism that's really tearing communities apart. Um, so I just wanted to point out how like every time I think about it, I feel like this deindustrialization has so many deep effects on the America of today. Like the cracks, you can see it and very clearly in these election times. Um, And on the question of Trump, really, I mean, I was really surprised. I watched the whole, like, if we think about the town hall that happened recently with Trump, I think I watched it on Twitter Live, and then I think within an hour the video was taken down. Thanks to Emil, who actually found the link to the video again. But I think it was really surprising to see that on this like very liberal democratic uh, sort of setting, everybody was cheering for Trump. The audience was all in for the Trump phenomenon, and they couldn't have that. I think they were firstly very surprised that he agreed to come on in the first place, and then they were more surprised when their voter base was cheering for Trump. Um, and then I think after that, I watched this video where somebody from CNN, I guess, was interviewing these 8 people. They were interviewing these 8 people from diverse backgrounds who were either Trump voters, turned Trump voters, or not Trump voters. So they had this little mix of people. And I think the first question that they started with was that the lies that Trump spreads about the 2020 elections. Do you think that that he should now give it up? He should stop talking about these lies that he's perpetuating, that the election was stolen from him. And the first guy that this interviewer asked said, "Well, maybe if you want him to stop talking about the 2020 elections, the first question you ask him shouldn't have been about the 2020 elections." And it was really like this is the contradiction. This is how these people trip themselves up over their own feet. They don't really know what they're trying to achieve.
Well, it's also they underestimate the people because they think they think people, when they actually, like, they don't have the power to discern what is right, what is wrong, what is true, and what is a lie. And I mean, that is why one strategy is to not have Trump be visible, or not have any of these people who are speaking about anything substantial be visible. But then when you, like, sort of, you play your cards that way and you make them visible, you sort of think people are stupid and they'll still believe in your lies, but they actually hear the man and they make up their own minds. um, so you shouldn't be that shocked that even your voter base found substance in what Trump was representing, because these are human questions. um, yeah.
I think the town hall, the people in the town, I think the people in the town hall were not liberals though. Yeah, because I think the crowd was, because it was a selection of New Hampshire people, and New Hampshire's pretty Republican, but also but I do think the point still stands though, that even if you came in an undecided person, watching that CNN lady be so that annoying would have convinced you, like, I don't even know anything about, I don't even know if I'm that down with Trump, but now I know I am, because I definitely don't like the CNN lady.
This go ahead.
Well, I just have a small thing to say about the elections. I mean, what basically this discussion is showing me is that who wins in an election is not really something that says anything about the will of the people. And that basically is a sign of a failure of democracy.
Yeah.
And, it just shows you that the state is becoming more and more undemocratic. And then you can tie it to, this cabal in the 2020 elections who came out and said we had to protect democracy because people are stupid, and they would just have made the undemocratic choice by choosing who they wanted to, you know. And then there's also the contrast with that, and how, you know, Indian intellectuals in the West, but also Western academia, attack India now for being undemocratic and not free because it has a fascist government and a fascist leader. But I don't think you can say the same things about general elections in India that you can say about general elections in the United States of America. There you can at least say with a modicum of certainty that to a large extent the results reflect the will of the people. So then how do you what categories are you using to judge, the democracy or the level of democracy that at which a state is operating?
This reminds me of so I looked at this PhD proposal from a friend who's doing a PhD in sociology at Berkeley that was measuring voter turnout. It was like a democracy index, voter turnout in relation to like level of violence in the community. It was they're basically making a graph and. The way that the ruling class and these political parties are basically like, I feel like they're trying to engineer election. I feel like they're trying to lead the ruling class, lead the American people into a certain way with so many different vehicles. I mean, we just talked about the town hall, and you talked about how the different facets of the political machine here in Philadelphia were able to get an advantage to Sherelle Parker. And I mean, maybe they have these. I'm sure that in for this public thing that they're releasing, a thesis. They talk about the certain knobs that they turn, violence and voter turnout, and try to mitigate it somehow. But I'm sure even behind closed doors, they hire these political scientists, and then they try to measure, turn and twist other knobs that they can measure for voter turnout for this party or this candidate. And what's amazing still though is that as we've said, they might be able to make some quantitative predictions, but they cannot qualitatively assess the American people. They're not able to really capture these shifts in the hearts and minds that is going through with these candidates, and the clarity that people are reaching because they see how this country has, I guess, gone downhill, and maybe they even see, across the sea, the rise of China and other places making qualitative shifts as well. So I think the full machinery of the political machine is against the people, and with various degrees of sophistication, but they still don't got us in the corner at all. I think they're on the defense, they're on the decline, despite their political scientists and who knows what else. So I think the future is very bright, and our hopes with Trump and RFK Jr. being realized. I follow that as well.
Yeah, I wanted to add, I was thinking when Purva was talking about this, and I think this whole discussion is really illuminating, because it makes me think about what democracy means, without a question of understanding what leadership is. And this question of what we are seeing now about these historically low voter turnout and so on, this is related to the relationship of the ruling class of this country and its ruthless attack and suppression and distortion of any attempt at organic leadership for the last 70 years. That has been the history of this country, really. And these are some of the consequences of this, what happens when, starting from the Kennedys and then King and so on, and Robeson, all of these leaders that arose from the people, which showed the people that they have a role to play in history. All of these leaders have been taken down in one way or another, and the consequence is you have this sort of this, I think the word I'm looking for is something other than pessimism, but that's what I'm going with. But this is the the atmosphere that's created now, that people really believe that they do not have a role to play anymore. It's this idea of this sort of defeatist idea that, okay, my vote really does not mean anything anymore, and I'm tired of it. And what you were saying, Doc, about
I think others were also talking about it, about the people thinking that they don't really have, black people don't think they have a party anymore. I mean, like like the history of the country shows that like all revolutionary movement, all revolutionary changes in this country has happened because of black people. And I think it's really I think it's really an unfortunate circumstance we have today, when like black people think that they do not have a party, they do not have uh, some sense of leadership to which like they can like lead their lives towards. And this is like this is the consequence of all these attacks on leadership. So yeah, I mean, I wanted to say that like we can't really talk about democracy without understanding this history of how leadership has been taken down. And I think this is the way democracy, like in the liberal framework, this is how democracy is talked about. The only thing you care about is the mechanism, but not the substance of it. You're not talking about like what are people moving towards, what is like what is really the goal of like the vote and so on. But yeah, I just wanted to add that.
Maybe we can read some comments.
Yeah.
Okay. So Neha, Blaze, Jake, Stephen Palmier, Don DeBar all said good morning. And then Jake says that what I hear about not voting from people is that nothing changes. All the politicians are corrupt. They don't do anything for people. Don DeBar says, yeah, like he just is putting in the statistics of how Shaw Parker won with 31.8% of the registered Democratic vote that turned out, which was 79,895 people. And he asks, are they just preparing for next year, wanting to secure control of the city? And yeah, only 10.3% of enrolled Democrats actually voted for Parker, which is what you said, Doc. And then even more than in 2016, this upcoming 2024 election requires an adhesion of the voters inclined to be behind RFK and those behind Trump. So, and then he agrees with Emily that the center does not hold, it's evaporating. And then Meghna says, thanks for this incisive analysis. It's clear that people are tired of good faith politics. They want unity on principle demonstrated through action and sacrifice. No candidate this cycle offered that. And Don DeBar says, such candidates are too rare, and when they do present, seem to be highly accident prone. And then he's just emphasizing again that the total number of registered Democratic voters is like 775,000. And only 10.3% of those actually voted for, well, no, 10.3% of Philadelphia voted. Yeah. So, but yeah, those are.
We're talking, just to be clear, we're talking about a Democratic primary.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And this is very important. The party, and hence what is pretty much a black primary,
Mm-hmm.
where black people did not vote. But a black candidate won with a diminished black vote. And it is true. She got, I think, Nuri, I don't know that I'm completely right. I think 11, 12% of the Democratic.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is, yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah.
It is also interesting, apropos, I think, Don DeBar's point of preparation, organizational and political preparation for 2024. Because if you look at it, LA, black woman mayor. San Francisco, black woman mayor.
Mm-hmm.
Chicago, black progressive, or at least, whatever that means, yeah, quote unquote, mayor. New York, black centrist mayor. Philadelphia, black, who will be the mayor, black centrist. It is preparing for 2024. But then dialectically, the opposite side of this, I don't know what happened in LA, I don't know these other cities, but certainly if it is anything like Philadelphia, anything close to it, the Black vote in 2024 is up for grabs. At least enough of them to defeat any, to defeat Joe Biden. I'm of the opinion, by the way, that Joe Biden will not be the Democratic Party candidate. Who will? I don't know. I mean, the establishment's candidate. He just can't hack it. He can't do it. And this vote in Philadelphia was also a manifestation of the growing Black dissatisfaction with Joe Biden. And his polling numbers, if you know, have among Blacks have decreased by 30% since 2 years ago. A 30% increase of the candidate, of the president of the party that is allegedly the party of the Black vote. We're looking at, I don't know how to put it, I'm looking for language too, a catastrophe for the Democratic Party elite, but it is also a crisis for the so-called left, the DSA types, the Bernie Sanders types. I mean, that was one thing that made me think twice about Helen Ginn. When she brings Bernie Sanders and AOC in here, who could not wait a day after Joe Biden announces his candidacy to endorse him. I mean, no questions to be raised about this guy, his war policies, his economic policy. I mean, please, if this is the left, I guess I'm channeling platypus now. I don't know. The left is dead, you know, kind of thing. But that is not the left. The left are among that mass of people who are looking for a way out of this and who are not going to be satisfied with a palliative of a fake left, like a Bernie Sanders or like some of these little minute parties who, in the real sense, when it goes down, are going to do what the nonprofits and the Democratic Party elites say to do. They did it in 2020, they did it in 2016, and there's no reason to believe that this micro mini left, who can be used, you know, for propaganda purposes, will do anything other than fall in line with the elites, the ruling elites.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. I think this is also related to what Shimbarto's comment was, but I think something that I think I just realized is that although, yes, many of the leaders of like the past period were all basically assassinated and cut down, and the ruling class did everything that it could to either tarnish or erase the memory of those leaders. I think it's also important to note that I think in times of, especially in times of significant crisis for the American political, economic, and social system, that leaders emerge not because they have like the most charismatic personality, but leaders like King emerge because they reflect something of the quality and the readiness of the American people at that time. And I think that to the extent that we love and celebrate and study Martin Luther King, that is also us trying to get closer to who the American people were and who they continue to evolve into. And I think that's part of how I understand even people like RFK Jr. or Trump, that like it's not about whether or not I don't know. Like the real question is what do they reflect about the people? And it doesn't have to be something which is neat or simple or without contradiction, but that, yeah, in their own ways, but also in related ways, that especially someone like RFK Jr., like especially if he grows in prominence, like that's not really even so much about him, it's about where the American people are and what they're ready for and what they are moving towards. And I think that that's important to reflect on, because I feel like otherwise it's like I think it's very easy to become pessimistic because you think that the ruling class basically has all the power and that they can do whatever they want, but that's actually really not true. And I think more than anything, like all of the signs that we're seeing and that we're trying to read, like whether it's in this election or in the overall American political landscape, all like everything points towards the people in a lot of ways rediscovering what they are capable of, like what they really want, and that there can be strategic figures who emerge who are able to capture that. And yeah, I don't know. That was just something that was on my mind. But
And I would add, I think building on what you're saying, Jeremiah, we're looking at movements of people.
Right.
Millions of people are in movement, and it kind of goes back to something we were talking about a couple weeks ago, maybe last week, that history is being decided by people, not by parties or governments. The people, as never before, are conscious of the world, more conscious of the world in which they live. You just take the Philadelphia election. I remember one time where a party worker or a union worker would go to a house, knock on the door, and Mrs. So-and-so, have you voted yet? And she might say, I haven't voted yet. Well, if you need a ride, I can take you to the polls. Okay, and while I'm taking you to the polls, here's who you should vote for. Just do this for me. That's the way they would say. And Mrs. So-and-so, oh, certainly, yes, young man. And they would go, dutifully to vote. I'm telling you, that's not that long ago. Today, the people of Philadelphia are in open rebellion against a political establishment where and that's what Samir experienced. Knocking on a door, the people slam the door in your face. I don't want to hear anything about these politicians. It represents the fact that the people are deciding, the people are more conscious of the world, of who they are, and what they are saying. It doesn't have to be this way. It is this way because it serves certain interests. I don't care whether it's a CNN town hall, mainly Republicans and independents that lean Republicans in New Hampshire. You know what I'm saying? In 2016, Donald Trump would not have gotten that kind of response from that same group of people. These are parallel events. In fact, Shantanu, I see them as parallel. Black people not voting, white New Hampshire people siding with the candidate who was most identified as anti-establishment. That's what they're saying. And it's just, in a certain way, it's the drama of it all is just that, a political drama of the potentiality of social change. And I guess we in the free school say it all the time to the quote left: get out of the way. get out of the way. The people can find their way without you and your apologia for the system. And I would just one small thing. Remember in 2020 with the quote Black Lives Matter demonstrations, the New York Times and the establishment said that this was an uprising. Remember that?
Yeah.
Now, it was the most interesting civil rights movement in all of history because it was a Black Lives civil rights movement where the majority of people were not Black. It was very interesting to see the cognitive dissonance. Is this Black Lives Matter? But why aren't there Black people being the majority in this march? I remember the March on Washington, majority Black people. You know, the Birmingham movement, the Montgomery bus boycott. These were Black people. Here you have a civil rights movement that marched under the banner of Black Lives Matter and Black people weren't there. Well, what did that tell you? It was not a civil rights movement. It was the ruling class trying to make it into that. And a civil rights and Black Lives Matter movement that appropriately ends a few weeks before the election. So was it a civil rights movement or was it an engineered and managed movement for the sake of producing a certain political outcome? That is the election of Biden. I mean, these are things that but the same ruling class who claimed that was a civil rights movement finds it difficult. And, you know, we associate civil rights movements with opposition, you know, which they are. That's what the civil rights movement was, to change the country. You know what I'm saying? Well, why can't you see these parallel, though not identical, movements where people are saying we're fed up with the existing order of things? And this is what the white opposition and Trump in particular are going to have to realize. And I agree with Shambarta. You don't just kill all the people's leaders and then say, oh, but we have a democracy. Right. You killed them. You smeared them. You took them down. Let us not forget, Robeson and Du Bois and Winston and others were taken down because of what they thought, what they believed. That's what it was. And you're going to say the country is more democratic? Martin Luther King was assassinated. Malcolm X was assassinated. Oh, the country is more democratic. No. And Purba, what you all see in the difference in elections in India and in the United States is real. What you see is real. This is a restricted democracy, a democracy because the elite says it so. Suppose I don't believe it. I have nothing to say about the matter then. It is, oh yeah, but I'll stop there. Excuse me for talking too long.
Yeah, I think just one quick thing is I think the more that I think about like the 2020 election and like the George Floyd thing, the more it makes me question whether the kinds of messaging that the media and the ruling elite were putting out about the BLM protests as like the next civil rights movement, that messaging was not only intended for basically like the white liberals who were drawn to it, it was also messaging that was directed towards the Trump people, because they were trying to basically equating like the BLM protests with the civil rights movement, actually saying that the civil rights movement, or that the BLM protests were more advanced than the civil rights movement, by making that kind of mentally political equation, they were trying to confuse the Trump people and to basically say like, oh yeah, this is actually like the BLM thing is the legacy of the civil rights movement. Therefore, you should distrust everything that you think that you might know about Martin Luther King, about the civil rights movement.
Absolutely.
And yeah, and I think that
This is true. Hey, Jerry, let me just quickly. Most people alive today did not experience the civil rights movement. Most people in Black Lives Matter demonstrations know nothing about the actuality of the civil rights movement. They know nothing about that. So you're absolutely right. It gives a wrong and distorted impression of what the civil rights movement was. In other words, all of the courageous people, the Diane Nashes, the Jim Lawsons, and just Coretta Scott Kings and Fannie Lou, all of those freedom fighters are disappeared from the civil rights movement, the Montgomery bus boycott. Well, if Black Lives Matter was about Black Lives Matter, well, why is it 10 Black people were killed in Boston, Massachusetts, and Black Lives Matter was nowhere to be found? So what, I agree with you. Was this an engineered and managed, quote, movement for the sake of a political outcome? And was it not promoted by the mainstream media to be something that it was not? You can sell anything. And that's what they did. They sold something to a lot of young people, which was not the real. And a lot of people say, oh, we're fighting for civil. No. You are being used in a larger strategic plan. They can't play that hand this time around, I don't think.
Yeah. Because I think it's almost like, given, like what we've been talking about in free school, the fact that we live in a new historically constituted period of history, right? Where actually people are more conscious than they've ever been in the course of human history. That explains why, wherever you go, whether it's the Trump movement, the RFK people, like also just most politically disaffected people in America, the consistent feeling is that you're being lied to and gaslit by the media, by the establishment, by the ruling elite. But that is a reflection of the fact that the people are smarter, that they're more intelligent, that they know more, and they also know that they're being lied to constantly. And that's obviously, like, that's what like people like Tucker Carlson are saying all the time, but it's true. And yeah, I think that like, but I think the thing that can be, if there's any possibility of that being negative, it's that you're put in a state of almost constant paranoia. And that ultimately the danger is that when you're so paranoid, obviously, about the ruling class, which is lying to you all the time, then you might basically become paranoid about also your fellow citizens, and about the people who actually have everything in common with you and have all the same interests as you. But I think that is where the ruling class can be the most successful, is not really trying to regain trust amongst the American people, but basically sowing distrust among different groups of the American people. And I think that is where a lot of the political and ideological struggle resides, I guess. But it's okay if I just read some more of Don DeBar's comments. So yeah, Don DeBar is adding that Philadelphia was central to Pennsylvania in the 2016 election and 2020. And in turn, Pennsylvania was central to the US presidency in both 2016 and 2020. And then he also cites an ABC News and Washington Post poll, which found that just 52% of Black respondents approved of Biden's performance as president, which is down from 82% when he took office in 2021. And the 30-point drop in support is the lowest of Biden's presidency and that this poll was conducted on April, like late April, early May, using a sample of 1,000 adults. And then he also adds that Trump support has doubled amongst Black voters. And yeah, Biden, it just continues to add that Biden has trouble across a range of groups. His approval rating from Black people, a core Democratic group, is just at 52%. Indeed, 27% of Black people say that they would definitely or probably vote for Trump in 2024 or lean towards him, whereas Trump only won 12% of Black voters in 2020. But yeah, that's all the comments we have for right now.
Do you want to move to Hegel now? Yeah, well, I just want to repeat, I think everything we discussed this morning, I think is highly valuable. And actually, I would just wanted to repeat something you had said earlier, Jeremiah, about how with Sherelle Parker, who, like everyone knows, was also endorsed by Mayor Kenney, that Sherelle Parker, I mean, this is actually something Catherine, I think, texted Megna, and then Megna sent me that. Catherine Blunt texted Megna this, but Catherine was like, my question is the people, I mean, the people who did vote for Sherelle Parker, I would like to ask them on what substance, like, what are you hoping to actually get out of this administration? But what you had said earlier, Jeremiah, is that or maybe it was Nuri, but basically with Sherelle Parker in office, in some ways, it's the final nail in the coffin. It's the final nail in the coffin of a certain status quo, or like in some ways like the current power brokers or whatever attachment people have to the Democratic Party in Philadelphia. It's in some ways because, I mean, the next 2 years of this city, which is in crisis, what will happen in this city, and with the assumption that it will be the status quo, just like the Kenney administration, Sherelle Parker's administration will be somewhat of a continuation of that. That also sets up for like basically the final nail in the coffin, the final nail of people's disappointment. And that also leads to that will also lead to people voting a certain way in the 2024 presidential election as well. Like people's dissatisfaction. But yeah, anyways, I always enjoy these conversations, these discussions we have about the real meaning of the election, this primary election in Philly. But now we can move on to going back to our deep reading of Hegel's Science of Logic. Let me see. Was there a specific part you wanted to revisit, Doc?
Yeah, I'm trying to work here with my colleague and friend Seraphina Harris. But where did we end, Seraphina? Because
last time we started like a page after the beginning of the chapter.
Okay, so
and then
where did we end?
Around like I think we were talking about either
so we have just given right within
the
some
reason why.
Why don't we start just conversely it follows. Would that be okay?
Oh, I think it's cool. On page 49, I don't know.
On page 49, but I'll because that's one. Page 49, Emily.
Okay, I see it. Okay.
And again, this is the chapter, the first chapter, the doctrine of being, which is another way of talking about existence, or the way things are, or the way they exist. So let's and then we'll comment as we go along.
Okay.
Let me just.
Do you have a doc?
I guess I do. I'll go with you. Let me see. Go first. No. But that's okay.
Sure. Oh, maybe it's different wording too.
Yeah, it's very different worded.
Oh, okay. Maybe you can just follow.
Yeah, I'll just follow there.
Alright.
Mhm.
Conversely, it follows that it is just as necessary to consider as result that into which the movement returns as to its ground.
To its foundation.
Mhm. In this respect, the first is just as much as the ground, and the last a derivative, since the movement makes its start from the first, and by correct inferences arrives at the last as the ground. This last is result. Further, the advance from that which constitutes the beginning is to be considered only as one more determination of the same advance, so that this beginning remains as the underlying ground of all that follows without vanishing from it. The advance does not consist in the derivation of an other, or in the transition to a truly other. Inasmuch as there is a transition, it is equally sublated again. Thus, the beginning of philosophy is the ever-present and self-preserving foundation of all subsequent developments, remaining everywhere imminent in its further determination.
Can I just say something quickly about this? What he is getting at is it's almost the question of time.
Yeah.
Beginning, present, and future. That is and this question of time concerns all philosophy and, in fact, physics, theoretical physics, up to this day. Without getting into a lot of discussion of it right now, Purba and Shambarta and other people who are concerned with theoretical physics will recognize this this retreat from the question of time. So I just want to bring that out and just say the other thing is that Hegel's understanding of time, even here, is dialectical. The word sublation means the same as synthesis, or where the two sides sublate, or one sublates into the other, making something new. Okay, so I just wanted to, I don't know whether that helps.
No, it does. How come time was avoided in theoretical physics?
Well, we'll get to this when we talk more about string theory, where most physical or theoretical physical questions acknowledge 4 dimensions, 3 space dimensions and time. String theory, to kind of prove its hypotheses, which it has not, adds 6 other time dimensions, which gives us 7 time dimensions. This has never been asserted, I don't think, in philosophy or in theoretical physics before string theory.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it just makes me ask more questions. So I'll stop right now.
Yeah, let's see where we go. Okay.
In this advance, the beginning thus loses the one-sidedness that it has when determined simply as something immediate and abstract. It becomes mediated, and the line of scientific forward movement consequently turns into a circle.
Interesting. Keep going.
It also follows that what constitutes the beginning, because it is something still undeveloped and empty of content, is not yet truly known at that beginning, and that only science, and science fully developed, is the complete cognition of it, replete with content, and finally truly grounded.
Does that make sense to everybody? We'll keep reading. We'll see.
But for this reason, because it is as absolute ground that the result finally emerges, the progression of this cognition is not anything provisory. I know I'm not saying that
Okay,
word
so,
right.
what is this? What is the word?
Not anything provisory.
Yeah,
Okay.
provisional.
Yeah. Sorry. Still problematic and hypothetical, but must be determined through the nature of the matter at issue and the content itself. Nor is it said beginning an arbitrary and only temporary assumption, or something which seems to be an arbitrary and tentative presupposition, but of which it is subsequently shown that to make it the starting point was indeed the right thing to do. This is not as when we are instructed to make certain constructions in order to aid the proof of geometrical theorem, and only in retrospect, in the course of the proof, does it become apparent that we did well to draw precisely these lines, and then, in the proof itself, to begin by comparing them or the enclosed angles through the line drawing or the comparing themselves escape conceptual comprehension.
Yeah. Let's just keep going. I mean, that paragraph we should return to. Unfortunately, we don't have the luxury of deconstructing every sentence and paragraph that Hegel is saying. I would only say it is a very important assertion that he is making, that it almost seems as though he is opposing the abstract universal and a kind of metaphysics that says that we can know the proof by asserting somehow what the proof will find. In other words, what Hegel is saying, you must go through the logical processes, to come to a plausible conclusion. Just one thing, his use of hypothesis, the hypothetical.
The problematic and hypothetical.
Yeah. This is very interesting. This is from Kant. You might wish to underline the concepts problematic and hypothetical. And my head is not getting me to it right away. This is very important. I have to come back. I'm forgetting how Kant and Hegel are using these two concepts. They're very important. Could you just go back to the beginning of that sentence?
Yeah. But for this reason.
Yes.
But for this reason, because it is as absolute ground that the result finally emerges, the progression of this cognition is not anything provisory, still problematic and hypothetical, but must be determined through the nature of the matter at issue and of the content itself.
Okay, very important. The problematic is the establishment of the here I'm, forgive me if I'm not clear enough, y'all. The problematic is the establishing of the general question to be addressed. The hypothetical is the oh God, please, shit. The hypothetical is more the method of addressing the general problem. How will we go about addressing this broad question of solving this broad problem? Let me give you an example from string theory, since we've been talking. The problematic is to establish that there is a unity between relativity theory and quantum mechanics. That's the broad problematic, as stated. That is the theoretical or philosophical question to be solved, showing that the two theories can be united. The hypothetical has to do more with the ways that we propose to go about solving that problem. We, for example, have, basing ourselves on Peter Wirth's book, said that indeed string theory correctly states what the problem is, the problematic, but the method of its resolution or addressing the problematic, we argue, and Wirth argues, leads nowhere. See what I'm saying? The hypothetical does not appropriately or correctly address the problematic, the problem, the issue to be addressed. Or to put it another way, mainly stating the problematic does not mean that we have the right logical methods to solve the problem.
Right.
You want to ask something, Sarah?
So yeah, the problematic is just like the question, or like what's the issue to resolve, and the hypothetical is like
The methodology.
yeah.
Where you establish hypotheses. I will do my own research, and next week try to be more concrete in explaining these two.
So is Hegel saying something different about both the problematic and the hypothetical?
From Kant?
Or yeah.
I don't think he's saying anything much different than Kant.
Okay.
He uses these categories. I think, I don't think he's saying much different than Kant at this point.
Okay.
The other point is his use of the word determined or determination. The relationship between the problematic and the hypothetical will be determined by the content of that which we wish to resolve. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. Should I reread that paragraph again?
No, you don't have. I mean, unless you want to become.
Okay. So we have just given, right within science itself, the reason why in pure science the beginning is made with pure being.
Okay. In pure science, theoretical science or logic, as it were.
This pure being is the unity into which pure knowledge returns, or if this knowledge as a form is itself still to be kept distinct from its unity, then pure being is also its content. It is in this respect that this pure being, this absolute immediate, is just as absolutely mediated.
This is so interesting. I mean, if you have a copy of this book, underline that sentence. Now, you know, philosophy and poetry is, you know, it is in this respect that that is purely abstract.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
without content. This, and then he says, this absolute immediate is just as absolutely mediated. Let me try to read from the translation I have. This is a beautiful sentence. It is a very beautiful sentence. And what he is trying to say is that the mediate and the immediate are never separated.
Right.
They're always in dialectical unity and in a relationship of sublation. Synthesis. My point. So even in his discussion of Kantian categories like problematic and hypothetical and other categories, he sees these categories and the process of knowing as a dialectical process, what he calls sublation, what Frederick Engels said is the negation of a negation. I don't know whether, if I'm not making sense, please tell me. But what I'm trying to say is that Hegel, I mean, it's so interesting how he writes in this dialectical way and thinks dialectically and is asserting that even in our understanding of pure being, we must understand at the level of the most abstract, the notion, the concept. That's what pure being is. Even here, there is a unity of absolute immediacy and absolute mediation. There is no pure thinking which separates, or pure thinking which is not dialectical.
Right.
I just want, let me just, I don't know, where's that sentence? I just want to see that. Oh God.
No, he's looking at his copy.
I'm just looking because to see if the language is different. Okay. Oh, let's just keep going. We'll get to it. There's a paragraph that I think will clarify. Let's just keep going.
Okay. However, just because it is here as the beginning, it is just as essential that it should be taken in the one-sidedness of being purely immediate. If it were not this pure indeterminacy, if it were determined, it would be taken as something mediated, would already be carried further than itself. A determinate something has the character of another with respect to a first. It thus lies in the nature of a beginning itself that it should be being and nothing else. There is no need, therefore, of other preparations to enter philosophy, no need of further reflections or access points. Nor can we derive a more specific determination or a more positive content for the beginning of philosophy from the fact that it is such a beginning. For here, at the beginning, where the fact itself is not yet at hand, philosophy is an empty word, a received and yet unjustified notion. Pure knowledge yields only this negative determination, namely that the beginning ought to be abstract.
The beginning, yes, I'm sorry, forgive me. Yeah.
If pure being is taken as the content of pure knowledge, then the latter must step back from its content, allowing it free play and without determining it further. Or, again, inasmuch as pure being is to be considered as the unity into which knowledge has collapsed, when at the highest point of its union with its objectification, knowledge has then disappeared into this unity, leaving behind no distinction from it and hence no determination for it. Nor is there anything else present, any content whatever, that it could be used to make more a determinate beginning with it.
Okay, just one thing. And here he's talking about abstraction, pure abstraction. And he's saying that even at the level of pure abstraction, no concept, no category, no notion is not a unity of immediacy. That is what we experience immediately and what mediates that experience.
Right.
That everything, even at the highest level of abstraction, is a unity of opposites. And in this case, a unity of immediate and immediacy. Now, immediate and mediacy. Now, what he is getting at is what he would consider something natural to thought itself.
Yeah.
And he says, if this is the case at the very beginning of thinking
Right.
about anything at its most abstract level, let us say its most abstract mathematical equation, if that is the case at the most abstract level, when there is not a content to this abstraction,
Right.
you know, if that is the case, then it is definitely the case at lower levels of thinking. That is, thinking that is informed by content, by a content.
Right.
You want to add any? This?
I have a show. I guess my question being the relationship between knowledge and being, because it seems like I'm having a hard time distinguishing the two because it seems very similar. And I guess, is this what you mean by when you bring in the whole thing about being mediated by knowledge or whatnot? Because I mean, I guess I'm just trying to put this concretely. Like when Elijah Muhammad says that you're dead when you don't have knowledge of the self, you know, is that kind of the whole thing, that knowledge and being have to be, I guess, one, or kind of play together? Because I'm just trying to figure out, I don't know, it's kind of confusing.
Can I say something? This is, I mean, Nathan, what you're asking, I don't know that I can answer it. I think it is really a part of what is at the very foundation of Hegel's logic. Pure being, and he's talking about the being of concepts, the notion. In other words, a chair is a concrete experience, but the notion of the chair is the abstract form of it. The pure form of a chair does not exist anywhere.
Right.
But chairs do exist. Now, pure knowledge is knowledge of the abstract category before the experience of a chair. Okay. A form of pure knowledge might be a mathematical equation. You know, theoretical physicists think that the resolution of all of the problems of physics is somehow in mathematical equations. So at the level of pure abstraction, they can solve all the problems of the world, or so they say.
Right.
Does that make sense? But what he is saying, that, well, the knowledge of a pure concept, a concept without its content, you know, is pure knowledge. Pure knowledge is knowledge of things in their most abstract form. In other words, most of us are incapable of understanding what theoretical physicists do with their equations. We have no idea. And so they'll say to us, oh, how can you even talk to me? You don't even know what I'm doing. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's that elitist thing.
Yeah.
But, and so they are saying that the most abstract concepts, the most abstract statement of a problem is saying that, well, pure knowledge is what will result from this. Okay. But then Hegel is saying, even at this most abstract level, already there's a dialectic of the immediate concept with what mediates it. How that works out, I can't say right now. You know, we got to read through. You know, I have to say a lot of this I don't remember well enough. But at least we know what he is establishing. And these paragraphs and these sentences are his establishing of the framework of knowing, of the science of knowing.
Yeah.
Does that make sense, Nathan?
Yeah, so like pure knowledge being like the creation of a category that you know the world through, I guess. Like
yes, how you know, yeah. Pure knowledge is knowledge of pure concepts. Pure concepts are concepts that do not reference any content. So Hegel is suggesting that there is such a thing as pure thought and pure knowledge. Hopefully, and I think he does, come down off of that high plateau to talk about actual knowledge of actual things. But he is saying to know anything, also you must know it in its pure form. To actually know a thing, but to know it in its purest form is also to understand its connection to concrete forms of existence.
I think Jeremiah.
Oh, Jeremiah, I'm sorry.
Oh, no. Well, I also wanted to ask, because my impression of what Hegel is doing with these paragraphs is, as you said earlier, to try to establish, like, if the science of logic is him and basically establishing a grounds for investigating logic and thought and reason and knowledge, I feel like what he's talking about here is like, where does that start? Where does logic start? Where does thought start? And I feel like what he's saying, like that part when he says the beginning is simultaneously an immediate thing, meaning it has no reference, but simultaneously it is also mediated. It's the way that I was interpreting it was that, you know, that part where he says like, he's like, thought is like a circle, where it's like the only reason why we begin to think is, or like to begin any thought process is like you have to come back to that beginning. And in that sense, it is something which is almost mediated, in that it is seeking to return back to that beginning of thought. And I feel like I may be misinterpreting this, but this is also him coming up again, like arguing against like the British empiricist people who would be like, yeah, who would be like, actually like the beginning of like thought is something which is purely unmediated, right? And there is no mediation in the beginning of thought, because everything is just like sense data, which then turns into thought, and then like there's no real movement to it. But like I feel like he's saying that in the beginning of thought, there is already contained within the beginning of thought the need to come back to that beginning, which makes it something which is mediated, but also simultaneously unmediated because it's immediate. Like it's like it is the beginning. It's the thing that has no behind to it.
It is both. It is both at the same time.
Yeah, right.
And you know, interest. If Jeremiah, can I interrupt you? Is it all right? Yeah. Interestingly, if you take the discussion of artificial intelligence, I don't care where you go. I mean, it's a lot of hot air, a lot of, I mean, just, it is such a confused conversation. What Hegel is saying, if Hegel were to intervene in the discussion of artificial intelligence, he said, wait a minute, before we talk about intelligence or reasoning, we have to know what is going on. You know what I'm saying? He said, he would say, I think, or a good Hegelian would say, look, this is a confused conversation. You don't even know, or you don't even define what thinking is. You just say, well, you got machines that think. But what is thinking? And the question becomes, and if you think about it, think about all the hot air about AI. Oh, it's going to take over the world. It's going to do, you know, the best thing they say that's true is going to put people out of work. Now that's real. But when they claim that, what is it? General artificial intelligence. Is that what they call it?
AGI, artificial general intelligence.
Yeah, artificial general intelligence. When they talk about that as being godlike, they don't explain to you what thought is, what logic is. Hegel is saying that to understand it, to understand intelligence and thought, you must understand it as a dialectical process. Another way of saying it is a human process. Thinking is not an imitative thing, a machine imitating thought, at least as I understand what they're talking about. Well, they'll say, well, a computer is the most adept chess player, beats all the chess masters.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? Well, but does that answer the question? It states, in a lot of ways, the AI people state the hypothetical without defining the problematic. You see what I'm saying? Which in some ways could be argued is a form of bad faith out the gate.
Because there is no problem that they're trying to resolve?
Well, they don't state what the problematic is.
Oh, well, yeah.
You see what I'm saying? What Hegel, and then um, oh, let me shut up. Maybe y'all have something. Does that make sense using that example? I think the same, when we say, for example, string theory claims to be a theory of everything and turns out to be a theory of nothing. It is a way of arguing or suggesting that either it gets the problematic and the hypothetical confused, dismisses one, and not even consider it in the interest of the other. Take artificial intelligence conversations. The issue, Nathan, maybe think about this, Nate. Maybe I don't know if this makes sense. The issue is, okay, what they're saying, and in the sense that, well, there is some bullshit going on here. But at the level of logic and reasoning, they do not consider what Hegel is asserting as natural to thought itself. That is to say, that it is not just the immediate, but the unity of the immediate and the immediacy, the unity of the problematic and the hypothetical. That thought is not a one-way street. Now, but where does this one-way street thing come from? It is a clash in the history of philosophy between the Anglo-American and the continental European. That is to say, between what Hegel is doing and between what, let us say, David Hume and going forward, American pragmatists do. It is the sacrificing in Anglo-American philosophy, the sacrificing of the immediacy.
Right.
The other thing is, and this I think is going forward in Hegel, the concept of synthesis and totalities or thinking in wholes. If there's something which makes the whole discussion of artificial intelligence, and it is crazy and wild and unanchored and no ground, to use Hegel's word, the thing that makes it so unsatisfying is that it is highly determined by Anglo-American and in think philosophy, and in particular, in this moment, by pragmatism and neo-pragmatism. That thought is only about the immediate, and we, through our algorithms and other things and our machines, give an immediacy, a context, a framing. Am I making sense?
Yes.
Can I ask a quick question, Doc? So
Oh, yeah, please.
because I'm trying to piece things together. So what you're saying sounds like saying that thought as like removed from or separated from the human, or the human consciousness does not make sense as a category.
Absolutely. In other words, there is such a thing as a phenomenology of thought itself. The study of thinking. In a sense, this is what Hegel is doing, a study of thought. Now he says, if you go back to the beginning of philosophy, which he's talking about Western philosophy, but that's good. The study of thought itself leads to a certain understanding of thinking.
Right.
the way we think. AI people don't have the capacity, the knowledge to do the work of Hegel that Hegel is doing. So it is, in a lot of ways, the blind leading the blind, and you don't know where the hell it's going to end up. We can say confusion. The same thing with string theory or theories of everything. It was dealing, and it's a different set of problems, of course, I would say that. But there's something very similar in the ways that they describe thought and the ways that they go about solving problems of either of theoretical physics or of the problem of thinking itself or thought itself or intelligence itself. And that's the question of AI. It's trying to address the question of thought itself. Well, this is what Hegel's trying to do. But they go about it in such an uninformed and broken down and really ignorant way. So when you read Hegel and you listen to the people of AI, beating the drums and they're like fools, man, the clown car. You say, damn, I understand what you're trying to address, but you don't even know how to think about what you're talking about. And that's what Hegel is establishing.
Well, Doc, some things are becoming clear to me. I'll try to say something sensible, but I don't promise anything. But this is also making me think about how AI, whatever software, but what the framework, what the logic behind developing software based on AI even is that you have to train the system on lots and lots and lots and lots of data. So it's
Absolutely.
predicated upon what is already known. But if it has no capabilities to address the unknown, like it does not have any framework to deal with the new.
Can I interrupt you one? Yeah. See what they're claiming. You see, if the universe of AI is the whole internet, assumption being that all that is known and has ever been known is the universe, the content of AI. And if you took, let's say, all of the novels in Chinese, in Swahili, or the narratives, put all that together, AI would come up with the most perfect novel ever written. Ha, ha, ha. And thus, oh God, it becomes crazy. But the issue for them is to make claims about thought, claims which, claims that they're not equipped to make because they don't understand thought. They think that thought, and this is what Hegel is saying. And you're right, I think Serafina is right. Hegel is addressing the British empiricist in the main, adopting certain of the frameworks of Kant, but not being satisfied with them. Of course, that's the drama going on here. But at least Hegel knows what the issues are. What is thought? What is thinking? He understands philosophy and logic as human processes because he understands thought. He understands thought. Now, the people talking about AI, they don't understand what thinking is. I mean, they're going with what is culturally normal for them. You're an American, you're a Brit. What is culturally normative is Anglo-American philosophy and its current iteration in America, pragmatism. So actually, for Hegel, and then extending Hegel out, but what he establishes a basis for, a ground for, is a very sophisticated, nuanced, complicated, complex, totalizing idea of thinking, an ever developing dynamic thing. What these guys are talking about is like if you take your car to your mechanic. Oh, I can fix it. Let me put this in. A mechanic that can fix things. So these AI people, we're going to fix the deficiencies of human thought. Okay? Mm-hmm. That's what they're saying. These are like mechanics, building some shit that they don't even, and then making all the claims because it's a marketing project as well, a money-making deal. But they don't understand the very thing that they claim to be talking about and what they say will replace the human being. It is now, the other thing is, and this is so Anglo-American that it makes you laugh, because while talking about this will replace human beings, this will supersede human intelligence, and thus turn back on the human that created it, and thus we're creating a monster that will turn on us. And then after going through all of that dystopia, then they say, well, let's hope it doesn't get in the hands of the Chinese because they will use it for military weapons. Well, why didn't you say that out the gate? No, you're not concerned. You're really concerned with money making and weaponry. There is no evidence that thought is going on. It is something that looks like thought. It is not thought. And if you say, well, look, we produce a computer that can beat every chess master, the greatest chess masters in playing chess. Well, yes, if the board is a square with only a certain number of pieces, right, maybe you will beat me. But if thought is what Hegel is saying, a constant unity of opposites, a constant developmental, right, constant sublation, right, process, mm-hmm, your machine can maybe, quote, outthink human beings if thought is confined to these narrow definitions. And this is the beauty of Hegel, and that's why sometimes I laugh, because is it poetry? It's really good poetry when he talks about this unity, and he's trying to get that language, that to say what he wants to say, and he knows this is a great work in progress. And he's actually gave his life for this, which makes me respect him even more. But how different than this is from the BS that goes for intelligent and sophisticated conversation about AI, not to mention string theory, which is another field of major bullshit taking place.
Can I read more?
Yeah, I wanted to ask about this thing of like what we're discussing about what thought is, and like the part that we were reading, especially where he talks about this part where he says that in science itself the beginning thus loses the one-sidedness that it has when it remains simply as something immediate and abstract.
Take your time with that. Read that. Where's that at, man?
Yeah. It's the last paragraph starting in page 49, I think.
Okay, go ahead.
It starts with in this advance the beginning thus loses.
Yeah, we have it.
Yeah, go. Keep read that. Yes.
Yeah, so he says that in this advance, the beginning thus loses the one-sidedness that it has when determined simply as something immediate and abstract. It becomes mediated, and the line of scientific forward movement consequently turns into a circle.
Keep on reading.
And
keep on reading.
Okay. It also follows that what constitutes the beginning, because it is something still undeveloped and empty of content, is not yet truly known at that beginning, and that only science, and science fully developed, is the completed cognition of it, replete with content, and finally truly grounded.
Yeah.
And like I was thinking of what you were saying, this thing about, I guess we're thinking about thought, but the thing is the sense I'm getting from the discussion and what we're reading is, and I'm not sure if I'm right about this, that he seems to have a sense of history about thought. Like, okay, so by which I mean that at every point that we come at a content or a result, at every time we are faced with with an observation or content of thought, what he's saying is that we examine the process which led us here, and what we are trying to do is to come at like a coherent theory of, I guess, thought itself.
Yes.
That's what he's trying to do. And I mean, I was thinking about this because I think a few weeks back, the part that we were reading a couple of pages before he starts, I think at the early part of this chapter, he talks about how at early times the like the most important, like the central feature, like the central thing about philosophy was understanding the content. But with time, as the cognitive process has moved, what like the thing we are trying to understand is this unity between the method and the content, because now we are at a place to understand the method after we have after we have seen that okay, we have certain content of thought that we have reached, so now we are thinking about the process by which we were led here, and thinking about, and like what I wanted to ask was this sense of history, and also because
yes,
what you are saying about AI and string theory, I think this is something that the Peter White talks about in the book that some of us is like starting to read. He says something which I hadn't thought about before. He says that string theory has this unique characteristic which is there in no other theory, which is that you have like in all like scientific theories, you have a set of fixed constants which cannot be changed. So once you have a theory, it is deterministic in the sense that once you assign certain constants, like every theory has had to establish certain constants in of the universe. And what string theory did was it allowed the possibility of these constants to be changed. And what this means is that it can basically come at multiple conclusions. So which is why it's not which is why he says it's not a scientific theory, in that it has abandoned the scientific principle in some ways. And I was thinking how this is related to like the question of thought that we are talking about now, because in order to understand the process of thought to arrive at a coherent theory of thought, we are thinking of what Hegel is saying. It seems to me he's saying that we have to, at each point we have an observation or we arrive at a content or a meaning, we examine how we got here. And this is something that is clearly missing from AI. I mean, what Purva was talking about, the whole idea is that you train AI models based on all the information, all the content that you have. But the idea is always to arrive at an already determined content. It's not to understand how you got here, which means that like the model I start with at today, and I see like 10 different things, and I retrain my model. What I'm going the model I'm going to have tomorrow is going to be vastly different from the model today. So there is no coherent theory that it comes with.
No question.
Well, I just wanted to add one little thing is that when we talk about string theory, all these extra dimensions. I mean, there are versions which have 26 dimensions, and the 10th.
Say that one more time. What has 26
There are versions?
Versions of
There are
string theory?
versions or sub theories within that whole umbrella where there are different, but we don't have to, but there are these variations also. And this thing, even with the one where I think it's called the super string theory, which has 10 dimensions. The extra six you don't even know if they're time. They could be space, time, they could be something else. Nobody really knows what they are. They're not really even time dimensions. But just building off of what Shambarto was saying, it's also making me think about a test for how bullshit AI is should be, if you do a thought experiment and you think of this technology developing at crucial periods of world revolution, when the world was fundamentally changing. It was something, but then it was transformed into something completely different.
Right.
This technology would not be able to predict or even cope with that because it doesn't have a training set. It cannot predict a Russian revolution. It cannot predict the Indian freedom struggle. It cannot predict the Black freedom struggle. It cannot that's basically, it's basically predicated on a belief that this is as far as we go. This is as far as human beings can go. We know everything, and then all our predictions about the future will be based on this repository of what we already know. But it has no means to deal with the new, the creative, and the future, really. Although it's futuristic technology, it's crazy. Makes no sense.
Right.
Wait, this is making me think. I'm only just catching up because I feel as if I wasn't fully trained in all of this. I feel like math and philosophy and that was always a very difficult thing. But I honestly think that what was helping me with this conversation is, and I know we've talked about this many times, but how this is like the conversation about AI, string theory, or even like the deficiencies in those types of logic cannot compare to Du Bois. And when we talked a whole lot about the synthesis, I think in earlier studies of Hegel, but also Black Reconstruction, we would always talk about it as like a synthesis of both inductive and deductive logic. And I know that's a little different than what we mean when we synthesize the mediated and immediate, like the concrete and the abstract. But in some ways, it is sort of like that sense of oh wow, when you see both in terms of studying the concrete reality to discover new laws or patterns or logics of development, especially the Black proletariat and the American people, but you also have the chance to apply certain laws or theories to the reality, or Marxism and whatnot, that synthesis, Purva, what you're saying, I think help you get closer to the sense that maybe you can see something like a Russian Revolution, how that developed, or see the Third American or even the Fourth American Revolution. And those are all things that that's why this notion of AI and the technocratic ruling class attempts to basically remove the human agency from determining history or determining the future is just one, also kind of in some ways pathetic. I was just thinking I mean it's very dangerous. We have to really deal with these consequences, but it's it's so you can tell they're kind of in a way on the back foot on trying to remove these things from the equation that really have to be taken seriously. Like I was thinking a little bit more, and I know this is departing quite a bit from Hegel, but I think somewhere in the comments, maybe Kristen Romero mentioned I'm skipping a little on the comments, but I thought there was a response to which Dr. comment about like the sort of dystopic predictions of these AI or AI commentators, and then like the dystopic is both linked to a general sense of dread that like what will the enslavement of humanity kind of look like if AI and like will like run its certain course, but how that's also linked to like, oh, what if like this falls in the hand of China or some authoritarian power? And I think that, and then something about the notion that like, there is a whole industry of like, there is not only like an industry or like just general discourse from the people around like, okay, what does this mean? And is this like a dystopic reality that we're headed towards? But also there is genuinely like an industry of Hollywood and all kinds of ruling class attempts to like, like control the discourse about like, oh yeah, there actually is some negative consequences to this, but let us present to you a version of which like now it makes everyone just scared or makes people like just this almost like there is a sense that there's some fear mongering going on, but instead of helping clarify the fact that like no, human beings, and this is what we get from Hegel, human beings and there are dialectical just like way of thinking, or even if we just get the chance to sit down, study, think, have faith that like, or like, understand what human thought really is and is capable of, then we have the upper hand. It's not all gonna, I think that it's one thing also to, I think, debilitate people in their sort of imaginary or even their sense of what's possible through like matching the moment with like these very dystopic negative visions. But the truth is like I think that should not limit people from believing that human beings are capable of making sense of all of this and finding even more human solutions than what is presented by AI. And yeah, I think this is connected somehow to a conversation about like stating the problematic upfront, clearly the assumptions, but then also mismatching it with the wrong hypotheticals or the wrong methods. But like it is, I think there's something to it where I'm not also just trying to pay attention to sort of the general discourse or the sort of ways in which like not only are the science and technology and like the Silicon Valley and everything part of this, but also so are the people who try to dictate what culture and the dominant narratives are, and somehow that like is going hand in hand. And maybe that is what originally was suggested by our commenter, or maybe I'm just taking it much farther. But I just do feel like we need to put the ball back in our court. Yeah.
Right. Okay, can I ask a question that is related to what Kathy is saying? So part of what's come to mind as people have been talking is I realize that like a question I have is what are the actual consequences of these different philosophical approaches? Because to put a hypothetical, let's say if everyone in the United States operates under basically an Anglo-American pragmatist philosophy, right? Just as a hypothetical question.
Why don't we say the elites?
But I'm saying as a hypothetical, if everyone operated under like an Anglo-American pragmatist philosophy, right, where things are not mediated, everything is immediate, like there's no pre-assumption, like that whole thing, is the consequence of that basically that people just don't understand how human reality works, or is it that becomes the reality? Does that make sense?
Say it one more time.
Like, because I feel like part of the like this whole Hegel thing of trying to understand, as Shamarto was saying, like a science of thought, a theory of thought, a system, like a approach towards developing a system for understanding thought itself, which is partially understanding the totality of the human reality, right? if you have an approach which is one thing, which is, let's say, like, for example, the empiricist pragmatist tradition, does that just mean that you are improperly understanding reality, or is it that if enough people believe it, then that actually becomes the reality itself? I don't know if that makes any sense, but
It makes all the sense in the world.
because it also relates to the AI thing, where
Yes.
is the problem with all of these AI, like these AI proponents, that simply, one, they don't understand the nature of thought, and that means that, like, does that then correlate to the eventual consequence of that, is that either because of their misunderstanding of thought or their lack of understanding of thought, it means that, like, is the danger of that the actual nature of the AI which is created, or is the problem with it something else, which is more like that they're not even able to understand
Mhm.
like what is the real I don't know if that's making any sense, but
All
I'm
the
just trying to
sense.
understand, like, what
Yeah.
are the consequences of these different philosophies, especially
Well,
when you take it to a broader level in terms of
absolutely.
how people actually operate and live in the world and understand the reality that is around them. But yeah.
May I just say, yes, I mean, it makes all the sense in the world what you were saying. And it, well, I like what Kathy said. It's almost pathetic at a certain point when you listen to these people. But it establishes the ideological nature of philosophy because it is not so much AI. We could put that aside as technology. It is how AI is being discussed, which is how intelligence and thinking is being discussed. I think that's the question. And does a wrong ideological, philosophical understanding of the world and the future, does it become a reality? Of course it does. Because if it wins and it is accepted, maybe not by every, let's say by a critical mass of the people, then it's a reality. It is a human created reality. I agree with that, which then makes the case for an intense and unwavering ideological struggle. That's what I would say, yeah. Reality, and I agree with Paul, but human beings create reality. Artificial intelligence and machine intelligence is incapable of creating a reality. What it does, what is created, is an ideological framing of a technology that then says that all human possibilities are diminished.
Right.
By the way, what they're calling thought is Anglo-American and white elites telling us what thought. That's the way you think, hometown. And you never created anything human. And now you want to come to us and say that the human has played out. Human thought has played out. We're going to, no, it replaces you, your way of thinking. But there's still thought, and there is still the human, and there's still Hegel. You know what I'm saying? There is still well, that's all I want to say. They are pathetic, to use, that's the word I was looking for, Kat. It's pathetic almost. These little, quote, men running around saying that humanity is done for. And human beings are saying we've only just begun to live. We've only just begun. Humanity as such has only just begun. And some little man from MIT or wherever is saying, but it's all over.
Mm,
I don't think so.
right.
I have some questions now too.
Oh,
Hopefully. So a lot of this is reminding me of some stuff that I've just seen in YouTube videos about Plato. So like there's like the Platonic ideal, like that kind of like concept of something that is like pure. That seems different than what Hegel is talking about, but I don't. I know that I'm missing something because I couldn't tell you.
You're not missing anything. Yes and no. Because Hegel starts with the idea, the ideal. Now, in a certain way, Marx is a Hegelian. In another way, he might not be a Hegelian. In the sense of Marx says that we have to begin with the concrete. Hegel says we have to begin with the notion, the pure abstract. That's where Plato begins. So I would agree you got that right.
Okay. I like the concrete better, man. That's just me. But
yes, I would say yes and no. I do like the concrete better, but in thinking, do we begin? See, the question is, okay, once we get beyond abstract and pure knowledge and pure concepts, when we think, are we? This is Purba's point. I think no, Shabbat, somebody that deals with it. The idea in string theory and superstring theory that you don't need a grounding.
Right.
That the pure abstract is all that we need to deal with to solve what is a problem of the concrete physical world. Hegel is only attempting to establish, I'll put it this way, a phenomenology of thought. What goes on when human beings think, not just Anglo-American white elites, but what do human beings do in thinking? And he is establishing that we all think about, that thinking begins with the abstract. Here's what I'm a little torn now. Some years ago I would have said what you said, Eddie, that, well, I fuck the abstract, let's start with the concrete. But is there something to be said for understanding how we start? Our thinking starts with abstraction. The reason I think this is very important, and when he says we, when I say we, I'm talking about human thinking. And I think he was kind of, although he didn't know very many human beings outside of, his small world. But to establish that, it's like Noam Chomsky establishing that human language is a human property. All human beings do it. And all human languages are equally, are equal. That's, I think there is something. Now, here's the thing. You can pervert the abstract. You can make the abstract a thing in itself, which Hegel is against ultimately. To make the thing in itself the abstraction that cannot be known. Hegel is establishing that even the most abstract is capable of being known by human beings. See, this, to me, this puts the lie or shows the fallacy of the discussion around AI. The AI discussion is saying that there's a form of intelligence, a super intelligence, as they say, a godlike intelligence, which can know the abstract in its purest form and then apply it to the world of human beings. Well, I'm getting myself a little. The fallacy is that the abstract is part of the process of knowing reality. Hegel is ultimately an optimist. That's why when we talked about Cornell and the neo-pragmatists say that that kind of optimism and a sense of progress and a dialectic is a naivete. Remember, Cornell he uses a category of catastrophe to counter the category progress. And so the category, and it's interesting, coming from two widely separated positions, that Cornell, a theologian, philosopher, neo-pragmatist, frames his understanding of the human world as catastrophic, as a failure. The same thing with the AI. It is a catastrophe theory, but they both are coming from a neo-pragmatist, nihilistic, pessimistic view of the human to begin with. That is an assumption that the human is a failure, that the human is a limited. That's not Hegel. That is not Marx. That's not Du Bois. That is not the history of humanity, especially at a time when human beings, as human beings, are more aware, more conscious of the world and of themselves as human and part of a human enterprise than ever before. This is not the man from the small island, courageous though he be, who comes to the United States to experience the human in all of its possibilities. Now that same man could stay where he is and experience the human in all of its possibilities. For the Anglo-American or the American scientist, who one feels that humanity is limited, especially if she or he is not a white elite, it is easy for him to say that this whole thing of human progress, of human history, is nothing but a failure and limited. And when humans rise up, like Purba said, to carry out revolution, they end up in autocracies. You see what I'm saying? That is not the way humanity views itself and its future. That is not the way Hegel viewed humanity. Human beings could know and would know. It is a dialectical process. Nothing is ultimately and permanently a thing in itself, cut off from human knowledge. So catastrophe is connected to an assumption rooted in nihilism. That's why they all go back to Nietzsche. People say, well, you don't understand Nietzsche. No, I don't understand everything about Nietzsche. But I do understand that his view is nihilistic and pessimistic. There is no historical content, no historical framing. It's just so many things that we could say and I think pointing to the fallacies of this whole, quote, contemporary discourse. And I think, and forgive me again for talking too long, I think present in the history of humanity and in the history of ideas. And we're only now talking about the history of Western ideas, which is not a small matter, by the way. Present in this struggle is now this moment of realization, a great moment of realization and possibility. Now you're going to come and bring the curtain down. No, it's not going to happen like that.
If I could respond to this beautiful expose that you just gave us. So like what I made of this, which confused me even more, even though it made me think a lot of positive things, was that like I thought you could make observations about the world, you know, like a Du Bois studying the Black proletariat, and then you mediate that, and then you make, formulate an abstract concept that is, I think, still rooted in reality of a Black proletariat. This seems, is this different than like, and which I intend to think is like kind of our task for today, of make observations about reality and formulate what is possible. Some of it that we would like to bring into reality. Is this different than what Hegel's saying? Because it sounds like when you start from the abstract, that's what I was trying to get at, of like the Platonic ideal, that you just imagine something just from I don't even know where, to be honest, and then a chair from the deep recesses of your mind, and then you try to bring it into reality. Am I interpreting this correctly?
No, you're not interpreting anything wrongly. You're just talking about two different projects. You know, you could almost say that Hegel's notion of thought and dialectics is a testable hypothesis. You know, in its totality, let us say. You could say that Marx's Das Kapital and Du Bois's Black Reconstruction are empirical testing of the hypothesis. When I say empirical, I'm not talking about the British empiricist. It is what Marx and what Du Bois do is what Marx called ascending to the concrete. But to ascend there, I think the ascension can be more sophisticated and more accurate if we have Hegel. The other thing is, you know, our discussion of Hegel equips us to more adequately conduct the ideological struggle around these areas that are in fact ideological, and that is, you know, we take string theory or we take artificial intelligence. And so much rests upon who wins the or how the ideological struggle moves forward. I'm of the opinion that the vast majority of human beings do not share the dystopic narrative of AI people, nor are they interested in scientific and philosophical dead ends like string theory. I think at the level of Hegel, at the level of thought itself, what Kant called pure reason, thought itself, that is necessary and indispensable. But so is the concrete testing of it, as in, does thought actually proceed like this? And here's the concrete results, be it Das Kapital, be it Black Reconstruction. Neither string theory nor AI can predict anything They make all the claims in the world. And AI turns out to be, like we said, a theory of everything turns out to be a theory of nothing. The predictive power of AI and all of their advocates, is very minimal. They have not, and this is public, they don't predict anything, not even the future of AI. They made speculative claims, frankly, ideological claims, rooted in their own philosophical, ideological positionalities. They have not predicted anything, and you just come out of the woodworks anyway. I mean, it would be a different thing if you've been, but anyway, it's arrogance and hubris gone mad by people who are already a little throwed off and self-centered and narcissistic. The world is not their oyster. They're not a part of the world. They are isolated in an Anglo-American civilizational crisis. Well, hey y'all, I think we've exhausted a lot of topics today.
Yeah, well, okay, my last thought is just that, well, I think there's a lot that I'm still processing, but I'm really stuck on this thing that you said, Doc, where you were like, well, basically with Hegel, the real important thing to remember is basically this belief that Hegel had that we also have, which is that the abstract can be understood or the abstract can be known.
Yes.
And I feel like that, to me, I also see that connection with what Purbo you said about how, for example, AI, well, I guess this is also Bart's point, but AI inherently cannot predict the possibility of a Russian revolution, for example. And okay, see, I'm having a hard time making the connection, but basically I think it's important because it's also what gives us like there are certain assumptions that we share with Hegel that gives us, for example, the ability to say that there is a Fourth American Revolution that not only can happen, but there are signs of it happening.
Yes.
Because this is also the problematic and hypothetical in some ways. Because, for example, someone may share the same problematic, which is like, oh, like, why are people not voting? Or like people are unhappy, or people are dissatisfied. But if your hypothetical if you don't have the right hypothetical, then your outcome will not be that that the American people, there's like a new moment happening, that people are in motion, that there's the possibility of a revolution that will forever change the country, but that your hypothetical will be something different. I feel like I didn't do a good job just describing that, but I'm just trying to give an example.
No, great. It's
great.
Yeah,
and this is also where, for example, AI, like the way Shambart was talking about models, predictive models or whatever. It doesn't matter how much content you put into that AI would not be able to predict this moment or be able to explain it. And this is what I think Jeremiah was saying like 3 or 4 weeks ago when he was like, oh, actually, I tried Chat GPT. And I was like, Chat GPT, like, right, what would Du Bois say about Trump? And AI was like, Trump, Du Bois would say, I do not condone like fascism and racism and blah, 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 blah. But that's actually not what Du Bois would say about the current moment. Du Bois would talk about war and peace, like, oh, there's certain things that Trump is missing, but he is the reason why he's connecting with the masses of people is because blah, 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 blah. And that's kind of how I'm processing our conversation today.
Wait, can I add one thing really quick? And I know this might honestly be something we should not say to the end, but I just wanted to vouch one more time for what Emily, or even just what Hegel ultimately said, but like what we're also asserting, which is that the abstract can be known in its, like we can both know it in its concrete and abstract forms, but that knowledge can be synthesized. And actually, I'm gonna bring something that maybe this is a very hazy memory, but it stuck with me. It's actually one time, I actually got this from one time we were in a reading group and we were, I think, walking through to some young people, well, we were also young too, like why it was that like a nonviolent revolution is a very, very important thing to understand in its many forms, because in a way, like you assert the fact that a knowledge of value, a revolution of values is possible because you come to know these values, which are maybe more platonic, ideal in their form, like love, nonviolence, even like democracy in certain forms, and also in its concrete forms, how that's applied to like a bus boycott, how that's applied to the transformation. But then you also go into like the more abstract idea of like the transformation of a people. So you go from in some ways you go from the abstract to the concrete to the which is also not we also have walked through it in a different way, the concrete to but I think there's an interplay there that I remember. Maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a way that you had drawn this diagram even on the board that was like what is material and what is immaterial, what is concrete versus abstract, and we were able to kind of walk through. At least it got me at thinking like those things. There are certain things in life, or there are certain things that in a university setting have been super duper abstracted, and they are also irrelevant. And like maybe that turns you off from really wanting to know things in the abstract. You want to, as a student, want to have concrete experiences, but actually there are certain things that you must come to know that are ideological, maybe quote unquote abstract in their ideal forms, but you come to know them and see them and how they drive people in, and that we've also asserted that working people and just human civilizational values just like drive people. They want these things to be known and be part of their lives, but we also have to come to know them. You have to have the right assumptions, and there's a certain way in which I think the current generation, and I think we've talked about this, how much they prefer action, prefer the almost like super hyper concrete sort of experiences or things that lead them like in a direction where they don't examine like one, if these like what like they're very concrete, or they're very important, abstract, but also like immaterial, like values, ideas, assumptions that you must come to know, understand, and parse through and realize. Otherwise, you are going to move in ways that you're easily also going to end up marching under the wrong banners, or you just don't really like, you just need a synthesis. And I thought that was something that like the revolution of values is a way to understand how it is that the abstract can be known in multiple ways.
Right.
For our time. But I don't know, maybe
well, because what you were saying, because for example, like abstract would be an abstract. Okay, if you believe an abstract can be known, then you will even be very firm. You'll have a lot of conviction in this fact of like, I may not. Okay, let's take Diane Nash, the belief in agape, for example.
Yeah, that was the
I don't see you. Maybe you grow up, you're at Fisk, right? And there's segregation, lunch counters are segregated, but you believe in agape. Like there's a belief in the abstract of agape, and that's important to even believe that the abstract is knowable, that agape is knowable, changes also even the concrete. Like what you make into something. I don't know if that's correct.
No, that was actually part of the example we were reading, and that's where it came up. And they're skeptics of like a revolution of like agape is possible. But maybe Neri, if you like remember that day differently, let me know. Okay.
But yeah. Anyways, this was all to say that today's conversation was good.
Very good.
Oh, did you want to add something, Doc?
No.
Okay, but anyways, food for thought for next. Yeah, no, because anyways, Kathy and I will talk about this offline. But yeah, there's or in this basically the belief in love. Like you actually, this is also the difference between neo-pragmatism and then what we're saying, because neo-pragmatism would not believe in that first thing of like you have to have that firm belief that the abstract is knowable. Like let's say agape, like that it begins that you to even be able to go on this journey of understanding something, you have to first believe in, let's say, like agape or democracy. And it, oh, whatever. Once we, Kathy and I will work it out and we'll bring it back next week. But thanks. Okay, thanks everyone for your wonderful comments. I think a lot of the comments actually drove a lot of this ending conversation, which I found very valuable. And so we're really excited we're excited to see you next week. And actually this coming week, we will all be traveling to Chicago, which we didn't get to really give updates on, unfortunately, but Free School is having our first Chicago event in, of course, Chicago at the DuSable Museum. And Neha and Meghna are hard at work organizing it, and we'll be premiering a documentary that the Free School has made on Paul Robeson, entitled Paul Robeson, Man of the Future, which will be really exciting. And many of us are traveling to Chicago, and next week, not only will we probably continue our conversation on Hegel, but we'll also be able to report back on the wonderful event in Chicago, on speakers like Minister Ishmael Muhammad, and Doc himself, and just the conversation we'll have on Robeson, Margaret Burroughs, and our observations of Chicago as a city. So excited to see you all next week, and I love you all. Okay, bye.
Bye.